Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man episodes 3 to 5 came out this Wednesday, and they impressed me a lot. Now, some of you will look at that title and think, come on, Lewis, that's way too early to call. And yes, you are right, but from what we've seen, the potential that this show has, I think personally, has second to none. Everything in this show has built towards in these first 5 episodes gives me a lot of hope, not only for the rest of the season to come, but also makes me wholeheartedly understand why they have already renewed this for seasons 2 and 3. But why? Why do I think this potentially could go on to be the best Spider-Man show we've ever seen? Let's talk about it. During my video for the first 2 episodes of the show, I said they were nothing groundbreaking. The dialogue and pacing was clunky in a few places, and they played it generally safe. Spider-Man and Peter Parker didn't stand out from the rest of the movies and shows that we've gotten about this character in the past. But I can now confidently say that any of those criticisms have been firmly squashed in these 3 episodes. It almost felt like the show needed an episode or 2 to find its footing. The dialogue flows a lot smoother, the pacing is on point, and the show really feels like it's found its rhythm of style. But the first major point of improvement, and one of my favourite aspects of these 3 episodes in particular, is Peter Parker himself. Peter in the first 2 episodes seemed like your average 21st century modernized Peter Parker. There wasn't much special about him that I couldn't get out of the MCU version of the character, or Spectacular Spider-Man, or literally any other version of the character at all. However, in these 3 episodes, Peter's character expanded exponentially. The showrunners and writers are consistent with his character and the themes that surround his story. He is just a kid who wants to do the right thing. In the first 2 episodes, I made a big deal out of this scene where Peter stops this lady from robbing a store, but instead of sending her down, he gives her a second chance. That kind of generosity and belief in people rather than justice is what really sets this version of Spider-Man apart from any of the others, but also simultaneously brings him closer to his comic book counterpart. I was kind of worried that this would be a one-time occurrence, that they threw this in here at the start of the show to just show us what kind of character Peter Parker is, and then just move on. But no, this is actually a consistent theme throughout these episodes, and is even subtly becoming one of Peter's major internal struggles. Here are just some of the other few examples that I found in these few episodes. When Rhino and his gang were on the run in episode 4, Peter decided to stop chasing them so he could save the civilians instead. It seems like such an obvious choice, but you'd be surprised with how many pieces of Spider-Man media has Peter then chased the actual criminals instead of saving the civilians. TASM 2 being a major example. In that opening, Rhino, once again, is actually causing havoc in New York City, and a massive criticism at the time of that film was that Peter never really even acknowledged the civilians that probably died during this rampage, but here that's completely different. Another example is when Peter was first offered to work with Norman in episode 3, his first response was that it might put him or any of his Oscorp employees in danger. This one was particularly interesting, as I don't think I've ever seen a Spider-Man show or movie tackle Peter's internal conflict on this level before. Peter's internal struggle when it comes to his identity usually surround people that he loves, like Aunt May or his friends or Mary Jane or whoever. But here, Peter is thinking about Norman Osborn, a man that he's only really met once or twice, and all of his Oscorp employees. Now, obviously, this is exactly how Spider-Man should be, but I was really surprised that they tackled it on this level. This show understands Spider-Man to his very core, and these episodes are building upon a strong foundation in the best way possible. But it wasn't just Peter's character that I was impressed with. In fact, there was another major character in these 3 episodes that jumped out at me particularly. 2 words. You already know, it's Lonnie Lincoln. Where do I start with this guy? Lonnie's character in this show is so excellently written. Lonnie at the start has it all. He's smart, he's the captain of the football team, he's got great friends, he's got a girlfriend, and he's got a loving family. But because of a turn of events which sees Lonnie trade his brother's place in a gang for himself, he is now on his downfall to becoming Tombstone. There are 2 major reasons why I think this story is absolutely perfect for this show. Number 1, the originality. If Lonnie's story has proven anything, it's that comic accuracy doesn't have to be adhered to for something to be technically brilliant in adaptation. Lonnie's story so far is probably the best of any characters in the entire show, and that's 100% down to the art created by Jeff Trammell and the writing team. They took the Tombstone character and fleshed him out, creating something special and beautifully tragic. And while we're quickly on this point, I also want to point the same applause to what they're doing with Matt Gargan, Camilla Black, and the Scorpion Gang as well. That's also really cool and really original. And on to my second point. Spider-Man side characters are never as fleshed out as this. Lonnie's story is actually rather refreshing in Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, and that's because I believe most Spider-Man side characters in movies and shows, especially for the last 10 years or so, haven't gotten nearly as much attention as they probably deserve. This goes mostly for the MCU movies. In fact, I'd say it probably 90% does go for the MCU movies, where a massive criticism of these films is that a lot of the high school side cast are majoritively two-dimensional filler characters. At a push, they might involve something closer to the main conflict, like Liz from Homecoming, as of course she was Adrian Toomes' daughter. However, apart from that example, a lot of the side characters from Peter's high school in the MCU Spider-Man movies have really just kind of fell flat. Anything interesting they could have done with MJ or Flash or even Ned, they didn't really do. In fact, I'm pretty sure they even cut scenes that added more depth to these characters. However, when it comes to Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, they do not shy away from this. Lonnie Lincoln trumps absolutely everyone in this show so far. He is so brilliantly written, and I couldn't give any more applause to this character. And it only gets me more excited for the depth that they may end up bringing to other characters like Nico, Pearl, Cho, Harry, etc. Speaking of Harry, that was an interesting twist. I know there will be some people out there that really don't like the idea of Harry Osborn being the guy in the chair, but since this show emulates the MCU's timeline of events, especially when it comes to the Sokovia Accords, and pretty much relating everything back to the MCU, it was only a matter of time before we had a character replaced what Ned was in the MCU. Harry finding out that Peter is Spider-Man is an interesting dynamic, and I'm curious to see where it will lead. Low-key, at first, I kinda hoped that Harry not knowing Peter was Spider-Man would have elevated Norman's motive to keep Peter and his partnership a secret, but they've probably got something else in the pipeline that's just as good, and I can't wait to see how this conflict unfolds, and the way that this relationship develops. And of course, we can't talk about this show and these 3 episodes in particular without talking about, of course, Norman Osborn and Peter Parker's relationship. These two have chemistry on levels I never expected. They steal the show anytime they are on screen, and personally, I think out of any character relationships in this show, they are written the best. Norman is fantastically terrifying, whilst also exerting levels of charming charisma, which is exactly how Norman Osborn should be. However, one thing that I will say is that I think Norman's motivation for helping Peter be Spider-Man seems kind of weak. Yeah, Peter saved Harry from a gang and also saved him from a moving truck, but that doesn't really give Norman the reason to help Spider-Man throughout his entire career. It doesn't really make much sense. But I'm not saying this as a criticism because I wholeheartedly believe this is done on purpose. Norman is definitely hiding something, and I reckon his real reason for wanting to work with Peter will come to the forefront towards the end of the season. We know Norman Osborn is a shady guy, we know he will eventually become the Green Goblin, so of course this is going to lead somewhere deeper than it already is at the moment. Okay, so I've spoken so fruitfully about the show so far, so let's move on to some of the things that maybe I'm not a fan of. Despite some of the side characters being really good, and some of the best side characters we've seen in Spider-Man media for over a decade, I don't really see the point of Nico Manero. Yes, I get it, this show wants to be different in places to separate itself from the MCU where it can, and that's completely fine. And don't get me wrong, that is working with Lonnie Lincoln. As I mentioned, I think his character is really well written. But I don't really see the point in Nico Manero. I don't think this decision is working at this moment in time. She's holding baggage, and generally I think she's got potential to be an interesting character, but they're not giving me any reason at the moment for her just to not be Mary Jane Watson. If you're going to replace Peter's actual cast of high school side characters with different characters, especially ones that are already firmly established in the Marvel Universe, then give us a good reason as to why. Nico, at this moment in time, is filling the exact role that Mary Jane Watson would have played if she was in this show, so I need something a little more from her. Now, obviously, it's early days, and a lot of the show has focused on Lonnie Lincoln up until this point, so maybe Nico's time is to come. We've also got to maybe consider the point that they're saving MJ and Gwen and the like for future seasons, potentially even when Peter is in college, like they did in the comics. And I know it's such a small nitpick, but I can't look past the fact that this is the role that MJ would have played. Now, of course, Nico's character could go on to do great things, and I'm sure she will. But at this moment in time, that is just how I feel. The next thing that I'm not a fan of, and could actually change in the future, is actually Aunt May. Aunt May is a massive part in Peter's life, and I feel like she's being underutilized in this show. I know that there's a lot going on in this story. We've obviously mentioned Lonnie Lincoln, Norman Osborn, Harry Osborn. They're even doing some stuff with Nico, and of course all the gang stuff as well going on. Not to mention Otto Octavius is also a big part of this show now going forward, so there isn't much time for Aunt May. But I don't want this show to end up forgetting about her altogether. Peter is still in high school, and Aunt May is a massive part of his life at this point in the comics, and since Uncle Ben has only recently passed, there definitely should be more emphasis on her at this moment in time. But just like Nico, maybe that's to come in the next 5 episodes or so I won't weigh my thoughts on that too heavily at this moment in time. I'll kind of revisit this point when the show actually ends. Apart from that, this show is fantastic, and I can't wait for the next few episodes. Subscribe to the channel to catch my next review video.